I'm a fourth generation shipbuilder from East Boothbay, Maine. Brian Decernier, the owner of Easton Shipbuilding, he showed me his dream of building a steel hull Columbia. Brian had spent a lot of times in New England sword fishing, and he had a great knowledge of the history of New England and the fisheries up there, and he knew an awful lot about the old schooners. At the tail end of it, in the 1920s and 1930s, they built the last of the era of these real elegant fishing schooners. He always had a dream as a young man to build several of these vessels, actually. But he chose the Columbia first, and he found the original drawings, and he got Boston naval architect John Gilbert to convert the original wooden hull lines into a steel hull, which is the medium that we work with down here. I was honored to be able to build another man's dream.
When I was in high school, I had a dream of building my own schooner. Fishing was one of the bedrocks on which our society in this country was built upon. I visited on a number of occasions the Essex Shipbuilding Museum, and you can buy drawings of the Columbia and the Mayflower and the Puritan in the museum. But the museum curator said, you know, up in the archives we have more records. I said, can I go up there and look through them? And she said, yes. And I plundered through the boxes, and lo and behold, I found the original blueprint of the lines, which is the shape of the hull. The original blueprint for the lines of the Columbia, signed by W. Starling Burgess, the architect, 1923. And we copied the hull of the original Columbia down to a 64th of an inch. So the vessel we ultimately built was an exact copy of the famous American fishing and racing schooner Columbia.
When I realized that it was going to be a steel hull, I knew that the hardest part of it was to put the steel on the frames. The frame building is very traditional, but to put the steel plate on those frames and have it come out smooth, I knew was going to be a challenge. But we were highly successful, and the hull came out better than anybody expected. From there, we started on the interior and the systems, and it went on and on and on until eventually we got a world-class yacht here.
May God bless this ship, the Columbia, and all who sail on her.
The history of the original Columbia was well known and quite renowned. When the Columbia was launched originally in 1923, they designed the Columbia to really race. Although they had to be a fishing boat and they had to go fishing as part of the requirements at the International Fisherman's Race. They had to spend a season in the fisheries. And then they'd compete. So she went up and competed with Bluenose, and she lost the first one by a minute and a half, something like that, I don't know exactly. The second one she lost by a minute 50 seconds, but as it turned out, the Bluenose failed to make a buoy, so she was granted a win.
As soon as we got clear of them, it was just the same as saying goodbye to the Columbia. Because from there in, we still crossed the line between 2 and 3 minutes ahead of them. Now we come in, It's officially announced, Blue Nose won.
And so the next day they were going to go out and sail the rubber match. But Angus Walters, he was a skipper of the Blue Nose. He was a crotchety old guy. He said, no, we won fair and square, and he refused to sail.
Can you give us a reason why it was awarded to the Columbia? Oh, yes, he said. The protest ended, and you did this and you did that. Well, I said, we got our rules, I said, before the race started. And I says, you nor no other committee can do anything or alter those rules without the consent of the two sailing masters. I said, if I'm the one, I'll tell you what you got to do. You got to put up another trophy and you got to put up some more money. Outside of that, I said, we'll be sailing for Lunenburg in the morning.
And he took his crew and left Halifax and sailed back to Lunenburg in a huff. And then the committee told Ben Pine, the captain on the Columbia, he says, we got no choice but to give you the Fisherman's Cup if you go out and sail the course, and you can take the cup home. And the American crew and captain said, no, we didn't come up here to sail by ourselves, and we're going to go home too. So. As it turned out, when the Columbia was launched, they failed to keep her rudder secured, and during the launch twisted the rudder, and she had a crack in her rudder post, which was all wood then. And when they went sailing and fishing with it to qualify for the racing, they noticed that she steered very hard. They had a difficult thing holding her up on course into the wind. A short time after that race, when she was anchored up in Halifax, she was hit by a steamer and did some damage to the vessel. So they had to haul it up on the dry dock and repair it. During that haul out, someone discovered that that rudder post was cracked, and they think that if that hadn't been the case, that she probably could have easily won the race, because they think that slowed her down quite a lot. But after that, she went back fishing and with her primarily Nova Scotia crew, and she was caught off Sable Island with a number of other vessels in what they call the August gales. And she was last seen on the north side of Sable Island, anchored up. And they thought they were in protected waters, but they got caught, and all the crew members on all 3 or 4 of those vessels were lost and never seen again. So, and that was in 1927, so she had a short life.
You asked originally why the Columbia, why? Well, I was in the fishing business. I spent 2 years off Sable Island, Nova Scotia. I get choked up when I start talking about this, but that's the kind of men our country was built on.